Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the board meeting for Transport for the North, and my first board meeting as such. So please bear with me if I get some things wrong, and if I don't quite catch everybody who wants to speak, please either shout or let me know where I've gone wrong. So on that, I'd like to welcome everybody to the first meeting. My first meeting, and ask if there are a number of apologies, and we're not going to go through them all, but we will put them in writing in the recorded minutes of this, unless anybody has anything to want to say on any of that. Okay, fine, thank you. As you all know, members are required to declare any personal or prejudicial interest which may be recorded but may have special relevance to today's meeting. I haven't been notified by anybody that they want to register on this, and I therefore take it that is okay. In which case, can we move on, please, to the minutes of the previous meeting, which I will hand over to Martin to tell us if there's any actions arising from them.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of sort of key points, the main ones we're going to pick up on the agenda when we talk about the business planning and the funding letter. I just thought, though, it would be just worth just updating the board, because we did have a conversation at the last board about the potential for TUPE, some members of staff to be transferred under TUPE. This is in relation to the transition from being a co-client to being a co-sponsor, and with the department becoming responsible as the client for Northern Powerhouse Rail moving forward, then there was a transfer of functions, which then would be triggering a potential transfer of staff under the TUPE regulations. It's just to say that process is underway at the moment, based upon the business case and the specification that was provided by the department. 16 members of staff have been identified as being in scope for the transfer across the department, and that consultation process is underway at the moment, and we are targeting a transfer date of those staff as being the 31st of March, which is when the Transport Development Fund funding expires as well. So that process is underway, Chair. It's being done in consultation and in liaison with Unison as our recognised union, so making sure that we follow and respect and protect the rights of all of our members of staff, and it will be taken forward from here. So that's the kind of key thing to update in terms of actions.
Okay. Does anybody have any points that they wish to raise on what Martin has just said or the minutes in general? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Well, let's move on then to the item number 4 on the agenda, which is the funding, business planning and budget update. I'm going to ask Martin to do the overall, to do an overall assessment, and then Ian and Paul to come in after that. So, Martin, over to you again.
Thanks, Chair. And as you say, I'll just do a bit of an overview and context for the board, and then I'll invite Paul Kelly to go into a bit more detail. It's just really to remind you that we are required to set a budget by the end of March. The discussion that we're having today is an interim step to get us to the point where we will bring before you on the 30th of March, a budget and a business plan. So it would be useful and helpful for me and my team if we can focus on the recommendations in the paper, which is in particular about the objectives that we're going to use as part of the business planning process. You'll see from the paper that as our role as a statutory subnational transport body remains in place, there's no change there. What we're recommending is that the golden thread around the outcomes and the objectives that we have as TFN remains relevant. But as we move into the detail of the business planning over the next few weeks, what we'll do is use that golden thread, but also use the framework that I've set out in Annex 2 to the paper about the sort of future operating model, and in particular how we're going to focus on the strategy, the investment and implementation of that strategy. Just a kind of way of an update in terms of what's happened since we last met, so we're all on the same page. At the last meeting, which was in person, you as a board asked the interim chair to write to the Secretary of State, which we did. There were subsequently 2 meetings with the Secretary of State that the chair and myself had. One was on the 1st of February, one was on the 9th of February. We received the funding letter, which you've got as an annex to the paper today, Annex 1. We received that letter on the 14th of February. I briefed the staff on the morning of the 15th, so they were the first to be advised of what the letter was and what its contents. And we also shared the letter with board members that same day as well. We've kept Unison as our recognised union informed as well. I wrote to the union later that day as well. I think what I just want to say is clearly in terms of the reaction. I think I need to let the board know that obviously disappointing for the staff. I think morale is very low. We've talked about how the impact of the uncertainty has been having an impact on our ability to deliver our work programme, and it's also having consequential impacts in terms of health and well-being. There is clearly, now we've got the letter, it's really important that we move forward quickly now, because I want to provide my staff with the clarity and the certainty that they're looking for quite quickly. That's important to try and retain the skills that are the assets that we've got, but also to make sure that we're giving real clarity to the members of staff. Because I need to say to you, we will be a smaller organisation moving forward. We need to be more focused on as a consequence of that, and we'll pick up the focus that will come through the business planning process. But we will be a smaller organisation, and Paul will go through in a bit more detail the consequences of that. We're going to need to have fewer members of staff. We have, as you will recall, you may be aware, we've been managing our vacancies since late last summer, making sure that we weren't taking on obligations or commitments that may then have implications moving forward. So we've been protecting the full-time staff by looking at and managing the vacancy as they have arisen. I will, though, at some point, as part of this process, be looking to open up VR for members of staff, and that will be a way of managing the pressures. But I also need to be clear that to the board that I anticipate there will be a need for some redundancies. I will look to minimise them, because clearly our asset is the people and the skills that they bring. But I need to be really clear that there will be some implications in terms of redundancies. My focus in moving forward will be to try to retain as much as we can, to retain the skills. And I will look to see the balance between people and what we commission. But that will be part of the work we do as part of the business planning. But I think it's really important for me to say to the board, the message I'm getting very clearly from the staff is they're looking for that clarity and that certainty. It's disappointing in terms of the funding settlement. And this morning I've circulated a draft letter which would potentially be a response to the Secretary of State setting out that disappointment. But equally, I think we need to be clear that we do need to move on and try and get this budget set now to provide that certainty and that clarity for the staff. At that point, I'm going to ask Paul, if you don't mind moving into a bit more of the detail now, Paul, and then Chair, I suggest we just get some reaction from the board.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Thank you, Martin. So I'm not intending to go through the paper line by line. I think I'd just like to take the paper as read, but focus on certain key areas within the paper, if that's okay. Section 3.1 of the report details the funding allocation granted to us or confirmed by the department on the 14th of February. I think it would be remiss of me not to say that I'm disappointed. We positioned a CSR to the department in September 2021, which was a 3-year settlement of £10 million a year, and then obviously in February we received a settlement of 6.5 million for 1 year. So it was disappointing, but however, it is what it is, and therefore we've got to move on. I think one of the points I'd like to emphasise, though, is the difference between last year and this year. Broadly speaking, if you looking at 6.5 billion, 400,000 of that was this is the core allocation. 400,000 of the core allocation was for co-sponsorship. So broadly speaking, the allocation between last year and this year is broadly the same if you ignore the effect of inflation. The big difference between last year and this year, though, was our ability to mitigate the effect of that funding allocation reduction last year. We had the ability to position relevant and appropriate costs into the NPR programme, and we also had the ability to utilise reserves that were built up. This year, the ability to position costs into the NPR programme has gone, or will go on the 31st of March, and obviously the fact that we utilise reserves, the level of reserves that we utilised in the past, we can't continue to use those level of reserves and be sustainable. But as I said, it is disappointing, but we've got to move on. So that then sort of feeds us into, I suppose the first recommendation linked to that. So linking back to the various recommendations, 2.1 says that we would ask the board to note the funding position, which we can conclude at the back end. In terms of what does it mean to us, so obviously with table 3.6 within the paper, highlights the cost and activity reduction that's commensurate with this funding allocation, and it is quite dramatic. However, it's a job that we've got to get on with, and where we are in terms of the process, as Martin alluded to before, we are doing an accelerated business planning process that will see us produce a basis on which to present an interim budget to you at the 31st of March, purely because the time required to go through all the detail that would underpin the full budget just won't be in place. But we would anticipate that being in place by during the first quarter. And so Martin, as Martin in his introduction mentioned the business planning process, so I wouldn't intend to go too much more into that, apart from the fact that 4.3 to 4.8 within the report articulate the key objectives that we're going to focus on. And the piece of work that we're doing behind the scenes at the moment is aligning those objectives to the annex that Martin referenced before, the annex to the paper, to make sure we have a clear thread between what the board require and the business plan, and then obviously the budget that underpins that. The final area that I'd like to raise to the board is section 5 within the report, which is around cost control. Because we haven't set a full budget, there is a degree of scrutiny required by ourselves on all cost activities. So we will be asking the board to note and approve the fact that we would implement with immediate effect cost control methods that just allow us to take a step back and review all activity. So if an activity that is present in this year, that's approved in the budget for this year, but it's something that doesn't perfectly align to activities that we would be proposing for next year, then we would consider not doing that activity. And I think that's something that we reserve to myself and Martin and the directors to have a judgment call on. The view being is that we just want to put not a stop, but just based on the funding allocation, a different view and look and lens on activity that's going through. So in a nutshell, that's the essence of the report. I'm happy to take any questions or focus on any other elements of the report.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Who wants to? Jamie, you want to come? Jamie Driscoll.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Chair. Martin, Paul, it's a horrible position you're in, isn't it? To be in an organisation that's seen its funding cut and having to deal with this sort of thing. I think everybody on the call, certainly local authority colleagues, have been going through this for years. It is terrible. One of the saddest parts is when you've got a dedicated staff team who have a vision of what's possible, and they're unable to deliver that. And the report's very clear, by the way, Paul. Thank you for that. The financial information's very easy to read and understand. The point about morale, I think, is important. If TFN is to deliver anything, it needs its staff to be believing in it. Read through Annex 2, and there are indeed a lot of good things in there that are worthy and fire people up. Everything from inclusivity in transport to the systems thinking approach, which we all know is necessary. Could we have, with that in mind then, so that the staff and the board members can really feel that there is some progress here rather than these being perhaps distant objectives, a set of smart goals when the budget comes up? And for the benefit, I know you, Martin, will understand this, but that's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and crucially, time-bound. When are things going to happen? Because that gives us a real sense of belief and purpose in what we're doing. The only other thing I would say I would like to add in is just to reiterate the purpose of Transport for the North was always to have one voice for the North. I know in great detail what the issues around the Castleford corridor. Louise knows about the Leamside line. Keith knows about the issues about Bradford and HS2. None of this would have happened without Transport for the North. I think that's something we've really got to keep. And that to emphasise that the Transport for the North is the voice of the United North and not DFT's branch office outside of Whitehall.
Okay. Thank you, James. Peter Kennan?
Thank you, Chair. Paul, could you just explain a little bit about the use of reserves? Because one way of mitigating the most dramatic impact of the cuts we're facing is to use more reserves than are suggested we use. And in the table, it shows a sort of use of some reserves. You've obviously reached a decision that is the appropriate way to proceed. Can you just tell us why you wouldn't, for example, decide to use £1 million worth of our reserves this year, just to take the edge off these terrible cuts?
Paul, do you want to deal with that now, or do you want to sort of wind up at the end and take everyone's account into being? That's a specific question. So, Paul, do you want to deal with that? Martin?
Would you like me to deal with that now, or
yeah, I think that's. I think where we get direct questions, if we can deal with those at the time, that would be helpful to everybody. Yeah.
So the table in 3.6 is purely an indicative position of what would be required to get to a level playing field. That's based upon utilising a substantial element of the reserves, but it also references the fact that if there were to be a reduction in staff, which is probably quite likely, there would be a cost associated to that isn't factored into these models, and that could only come from reserves. So again, what we've got is to allocating at £500,000 per year for 3 years takes us down to a reserve which is it's getting close to our minimum reserve. Now, I think as we become a smaller organisation, there is a consideration to be given about, do we need to carry a reserve at £2 million or a lower reserve? And I think that's certainly something that we would consider as part of the budget process. But just, I mean, the levels of reserves just aren't big enough to mitigate this. I mean, we'll have approximately £4.2 million of the reserves at the end of this year. That's what we'll have, because we're only solely DFT funded, so we don't have the capacity to carry anything more substantial. And I think that potentially carrying the reserves at the level that we did a year ago may well have influenced the allocation that was given to us by the department a year ago.
Peter, does that answer your point?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's been considered, obviously, and I think it's something we should just keep in mind as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mundry.
Oh, yes, thank you. Like I said, it's very disappointing news, particularly for what we're trying to achieve, or we have achieved in this Transport for the North programme. But we were, we think, doing a good job and actually quantifying everything we put forward and had the team behind us to do that. It just seems that we've been downgraded, part dismantled, and it's going to impact on how effective we can be to represent the people for the North going forward. But the question I've got now is, how do we refocus and continue to represent effectively the people of the North?
Yep. I think that is something we're going to have a more general discussion on. That's a very good point that we need to take forward. Louise.
Thank you. Without sort of repeating what everybody else has said, I want to reiterate as well my disappointment in this, which is not surprisingly, and actually what Jamie said, we sort of get a bit blasé about this in local government because we never expect anything else. But just a couple of questions around the staffing, and I think in the report it says we've got 16 potentially TUPEing over to DFT. So first of all, I'd like to know, is that definite? And do the 16 know who they are? And for the rest of the workforce, I just wonder what the timeline is, because we talked about morale, and I think the sooner people know for sure what's happening, the better it is. And just finally, have we considered any other ways of income generating? Is there anything we could do to bring money in without solely relying on DFT? And I haven't got an answer to that, but I just wondered if that's something we could look at.
Okay. Thanks, Louise. I think the TUPE people do know what they are, but Martin, do you want to respond on that?
Yeah, so just to be clear, we, based on the business case and service specification, which the department supplied after the last board meeting, we've been through a process where we've identified those individuals. We've had the first round of consultation with those individuals, so we've been through stage 1 of the TUPE process. We're now moving into stage 2 of the TUPE process. So 16 members of staff have been identified as being in scope. They've had their consultations, conversations. I've been involved and presented and advised them, and we've had them providing feedback on the as part of the first stage of consultation. We're moving into the second stage now, so it is. They've been identified and they're going through the process.
Thank you, Councillor Hale, Darren Hale.
Good morning, everybody. And if my question might seem a bit odd, I do apologise for being a couple of minutes late in that it's our council budget meeting tomorrow, actually, so I was overrunning in a previous meeting. It was actually following on from Peter's point about levels of reserves, but I was more concerned with 3.2. So I don't know if this was covered before I got here, which was this point about, because obviously in your projections on page 15, you've projected, obviously, ongoing revenue at the same levels, but at 3.2 I read that nothing's guaranteed, so because it's a single year financial settlement with a risk. So I don't know, Paul, whether you could perhaps is it a single year settlement with some sort of tacit nod and wink assurances, or is it genuinely, is that best case scenario at 15 that we're putting forward? Because I read that what I would want is some reassurance that 3.2, is there going to be another haircut next year? I suppose that's the sort of query I'm asking, really, and whether or not we're going into bat to check that that's not the case, because it seems like I know local government in general is in a similar position with that single year settlement, but obviously, although it's very bad in local government in terms of ongoing funding compared to what it was, in terms of we're still under pressure. We weren't facing a 40% cut this year, so. I don't know, Paul, whether you're best placed to answer that or someone else is. If
I might pick that one up, Paul, I think it kind of picks up to the point that Mayor Driscoll was making earlier about SMART goals. I take the reference in the letter as an opportunity for us to demonstrate our added value, and that's where I think Mayor Driscoll's point about having very clear SMART targets as part of the business planning allows us to then go back to the Secretary of State, and I would look to work with the board to develop a proposition that we could go back to with the Secretary of State early in the autumn. Because we know from the business planning process that we've done internally before Christmas, we know where we have identified opportunities where we think we can add value. I think what I'm asking the board at this point is we need to fit in around the funding that we have got. I don't want us to lose our ambition. I don't want to lose the added value. And indeed, it's kind of interesting to see the extent to which partners are actually approaching us now for our support, which kind of chimes with the point made in the Secretary of State's letter about us providing support for local authority capability. So I think my view is we have the ability to make a very strong proposition over the course of the next 6 months, which we can then put to the Secretary of State and demonstrate why actually in future years, it should be multi-year funding, and B, we could offer more if we had more funding. That would be my approach, and that's how I would want to position us moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Darren, I hope that answers your point. Andy Burnham.
Thanks very much, Chair. In some ways, Martin has just sort of begun to answer my point, Chair. It was obviously a big disappointment to see that the full cut is coming through. Louise is right that obviously at council level, people are used to dealing with serious cuts, but 40% is massive, isn't it? When it comes to any organisation, it's fundamentally going to change the capability of the organisation. So I guess all I was wanting to say, Chair, was almost to see if you coming in, maybe this was an opportunity for you to sort of set out now, okay, well, here's what we can do with what we've got from here, but also say we can't have an annual situation where this is, you can't do this again, can you? And you can't keep taking a sort of chunk out of TFN. I think there needs to be a sort of fairness in saying, well, it's, we're going to have to work with this, but here's what we feel we need now for the medium to longer term, so that TFN can kind of do its work without this sort of fear of something similar coming again over the horizon. I think it is such an exceptionally large cut that I think, if the organisation were to face something similar again, or an annual uncertainty about its funding, then my worry would be that would severely impact our ability to plan and to develop our ambitions, as Martin just said. So I just thought whether there's an opportunity for you as chair now to sort of say we absorb this, we take it on the chin kind of thing, but we need this level of certainty going forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. I wasn't necessarily anticipating having this sort of discussion at the first meeting that I was going to chair. I think you're right in saying what we've got to do as far as set out and get reassurance over the next 3 years, and that is certainly something I want to work with the mayors and the board to make the case. So I think it is part of making the case that was said earlier on by Darren, I think, or possibly Peter, about representing the whole of the North and the joint approach from the whole of the North. So I've started my discussions with some members, and I will continue that up to the next public board meeting where we can return to this. Councillor Heather Scott.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. I would just like to go back to the comment about the use of reserves. From Tees Valley, we obviously approved the suggestion. It's £500,000 over the next 3 years, but it was just Paul's comment that I think he made, that he thought the level of reserves that we had last year might have influenced the allocation that we've got. And I think sometimes in local government, the government does look at our reserves, and we always keep reserves there for the benefit of the unexpected, which obviously this is, I think, what we're trying to do in this budgeting process. But I just wondered whether there was a concern, because, as I say, but government departments very often look at your reserves and say you should be using more. I just wondered if that was what Paul was meaning, and I think that's worrying if that's what his view was. If I could just have clarification on that.
Martin, are you in a position to give a view on that?
Sure.
I might invite Ian Craven in probably one of his last appearances before the board to offer a view about that.
Thanks, Martin. I think this goes back to Paul's referring to the funding letter from not January just gone, but the one before, when we, if you recall, not only got the cut in funding of the 40% that Mayor Burnham just mentioned, but also a £3 million in-year funding cut. And the explicit reason for that, given in the funding letter, was that TFN's reserves were above a point, and therefore we could use some of those reserves to fund in-year spending. I think he's also drawing attention to the fact that once somebody's done that once, there's always a risk that they'll do it again. I think Councillor Scott is right. There is just a perennial mismatch of worldview between civil servants who are operating under one set of accounting frameworks, central government accounting frameworks, and local government people who are operating under the CIPFA code and therefore have a different set of rules that they need to comply with.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Keith Little.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Local government has suffered this over many years now, and massive amounts of money have gone out of our economies. But nevertheless, if our economies are going to grow, we need the infrastructure to enable them to grow. And the loss of staff, highly skilled staff, highly committed staff, is not the way to go forward. My authority have a big ambition going forward, although our life is limited now for the next 13 months, and 2 new unitaries will come in, but still they'll need to work as well to enhance productivity and the economic benefit of the county. And we have been looking to work further with Transport for the North officers rather than working with consultancies that cost us an absolute fortune and don't always give us what we're looking for. And I think we need to be telling government that, you know, we are large authorities across the northwest of England, and we need to be using the staff better and getting our value for money out of Transport for the North. This is not the way to go. It doesn't put any confidence into transport into the north of England, and I just think it's a wrong move altogether. We need to stick together, and we need to get our members of parliament. Don't forget, we all have members of parliament who should be supporting our communities, and they should be speaking up on our behalf as well.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Ian, Paul, I don't know if you want to come back and sum up, or whether we've answered them as we've gone through. Martin?
If I might, Chair, I was just going to do a bit of a sweep on a few of the things that we haven't talked about. So I just want to say to the board members, yes, we're all disappointed. I think this is as I responded to one of the previous questions. I think that the task in hand now to protect as many of the staff as possible is to get us onto a sustainable footing within the funding that we've got, and that's what we will do with the business planning process. We will do that, as we said, subject to the board being comfortable. We're continuing to use the golden thread that we've had in previous years, but overlaying the approach that's set out in Annex 2, and I picked up on the point from Mayor Driscoll about making those some smart goals and objectives, and I think that's absolutely right, because I think that will help us really moving into the autumn. I picking up on Councillor Little's point, it's actually really quite ironic, perhaps, at a point where the letter is saying that we are there to help support local authorities' capabilities, and we're getting more demands on our time, that we're going to have to go through this process. But as I said in response to a previous question, I'm absolutely clear that what we've got in the work that we've done to date around business planning, there is a compelling offer that I want us to pull together, working with the board, that we can bring to you in the autumn, that we can then put before the department and for the Secretary of State to consider, because I think there are opportunities where we can demonstrate that added value and look to make the case for further funding, because I think the point about having a regional centre of excellence with the technical capability we've got is something that does add real value. Chair, I was going to say we circulated earlier this morning, and I'm mindful of members, they wouldn't have had a proper chance to look at it, so I'm happy for comment. But we've suggested a response to the Secretary of State letter, recording the disappointment on the funding, but also highlighting that it is comforting to see the support for the analytical team, because that is one of our USPs. We've got confirmation of the funding for Rail North Partnership, which is also an important facet that we bring, because that's our link into working with our operators at both TransPennine and Northern. The letter also talks about how you as a board have consistently said you want that co-sponsor role to be meaningful and to add value, and we will be bringing back propositions around that for you in the next meeting. And I think it's been interesting, Chair, hasn't it? As we've been going around the region, it's clear that, as I think you've identified, the door is not closed on some of these conversations around the IRP. It's a starting point, and I think we need to use that co-sponsor role to get the North's voice into the conversations as we have done in the past. And the final point I would say in the draft letter, and Chair, it kind of reflects, I think, some of the conversations we've had. Let's take the opportunity of saying, reminding that if we want to have robust advice, having an indicative funding envelope actually provides you as a board with the opportunity to have those conversations, as I know the board wants. So I think my advice in terms of responding to the letter and the draft, and as I said, I'd be happy to take comments up until the end of the week, perhaps, in terms of that draft letter, is to focus on those areas where we can continue to build the momentum around the analytical capability, around Rail North Partnership, around making the case for an indicative funding envelope to then provide more robust advice to the Secretary of State. But let's keep building that conversation moving forward.
Okay. Martin, thank you for that. I think, yes, the letter has been circulated that Martin's referred to, and if anybody else got any comments, if they can let us have a view on that by the close of play this week, because we'd like to get that letter sent off very quickly after that. In that case, then, I think basically the board will be asked to approve an interim budget at its meeting on the 30th of March, but what has been said today will be taken into account with some of the ideas, I think, giving us a work plan as well to come up with some responses to the suggestions that have been made. So unless anybody else has got another point they want to make, can we move on? Sorry,
Chair, I was just going to say, so I take it that the board is comfortable that the objectives we set out in 4.3 to 4.8 are the ones that we're going to use for our business planning. We will then work through the business plan process, as we've said, and it's just to make sure that the board is reassured or comfortable that we do apply the cost control measures that we set out, because that is something that we need to do in the interim as well, just to help us through this transition. Paul explained those, but I'm taking that unless there's any dissent, the board are happy with that.
Okay, that seems to be everybody content. Okay, fine. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ian, for all your work over a long period for the organisation. And although this is the last budget you'll be working on, no doubt you'll keep an eye on what we're doing as well. So thank you very much indeed for your work and time.
Thank you, Patrick.
Okay, can we then move on to Tim Foster's going to take a lead on the update of the IRP, and this is a progress report. Obviously, there'll be a much bigger discussion on the 30th of March. So, Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. As the Chair's just said, we provided a brief update paper to you this time round, which covers the activities that happened since the last board meeting, and I'll take that largely as read. The work that we are doing, that the board asked us to do on the environmental and economic assessment of the IRP is underway. We'll be ready to bring that back to you next time, but I think a lot of the headlines have been discussed at previous board meetings. It's obviously very clear from the technical report that was published in January that the full economic value of NPR and HS2 haven't been taken into account in the IRP, and therefore there is that opportunity to explore how that can provide, in fully assessing that value, how that can provide the opportunity to open up some of those conversations that Martin referred to in the last session. So we've also started the work now to look at the opportunities to provide a local contribution to NPR, and identified a number of opportunities to pursue, and we have a small working group of officers and LEP members that is supporting that activity, and again we'll bring that back in March, and that will be one point, a part of how we now work with you and the department to make sure that the full value of HS2 and NPR can be reflected in investment decision making and what it means for future phases beyond the IRP. There's a short section at the end of the paper which talks about where we go next. And I think they're linked very much to the discussion about the business plan and the future operating model for the organisation. As Martin said, we've had the funding confirmation about the analytical programme for MPR continuing to operate from within TFN. There is funding, confirmed funding for the sponsorship function. So what the paper is really saying is, as we move to from co-client to co-sponsor of MPR, there are three kind of broad areas set out in section 4 about the activities that we should do, and that will be a combination of working as part of the sponsor to make sure that not only is MPR phase 1 delivered, but actually can be enhanced where possible through local contribution and government investment. Working very much, as we want to do with partners on helping to bring forward and enhance the case for locally led schemes. And again, the IRP does open up the opportunity in a number of areas for locally led investment to be brought forward. And clearly, and we can talk about the next strategic transport plan in the next item, but clearly within the next STP that we'll be producing for the board over next year, what we will want to do is retain the ambition and to use the STP as the vehicle to make for the case for why we still need the level of connectivity through MPR and HS2 to create that interconnected north. So that's the sort of the high level view about where we see the TFN sort of role come forward, and really happy to sort of take feedback and comments on that point. Linked to what we're really looking forward today is just a broad steer on those next steps and the direction, and then obviously we'll continue to develop all of that through business planning and further discussion with DFT. So that was it from me for today, Chair. Marcel, I don't know whether there's anything else you want to add around the integrated rail plan.
Okay, thanks for that, Tim. Of course, you've attached is the submission we made to the Transport Select Committee that Martin and I gave evidence to. I know Andy's given evidence, and I think Tracy has or is about to as well. And I think they're making several visits to the area. Do we know when the committee are due to report? Is there a timetable they've set themselves?
My understanding is that the evidence sessions continue through until the middle of March, and I believe, but we'll need to confirm that they're intending to report then late March, April.
Okay, fine, thank you. Right, I got Tracy and Rob that want to come in. Tracy Braben first, and then Andy. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And if I could just quickly send my sympathies to the members of staff that are losing their job, and to reiterate that we will be looking for very clever transport folk for the mass transit and for our plans here. So I'm hoping that anybody that's lost their job might think of coming over the Pennines or coming to join us. Apologies for my late arrival. I was with the Minister talking about mass transit and HS2, and he was on front of the Yorkshire Post for anybody that's seen that this morning, saying everything is still on the table and HS2 to Leeds with a T-shaped station is still under consideration. Even though there's no money, the adaptive approach could potentially still weave that in, and once we come to the conclusion of what we need, we could end up with HS2 to Leeds. Obviously, there are lots of people on this call that are more cynical than me, but it did feel quite a positive meeting. But one thing I'd just like to ask around going forward around the IRP, and thank you very much for this great submission. I thought it was excellent, and you raised a lot of the points that we've discussed many times on this committee, on this board. But what I would hope that we could continue to do is, we were asked by government to make a case of the most cost effective, the most impactful version of what we need for the north. And that is that new line between Manchester Leeds via Bradford. I really want us to keep making that case that is still on the table. And it's not just about connectivity, actually. For anybody that was stuck in the floods the other day, I was in Leeds trying to get back to Huddersfield, and the M62 was closed to HGVs. The Calder line was closed to flooding. We couldn't get to Huddersfield on the Transpennine. I had to go book into a hotel. It was a match day as well, so there were lots of people wandering around sleeping on the platform. This resilience is part of our bid to government, that it's not just about capacity or speed, it's about resilience in times of crisis and flooding. So I just really want to make the case that we don't give up on our new line ambitions. Just keep making the case that we need more detail around the thinking that government went into when, how did they come to this conclusion if they didn't introduce any thinking around opportunity, access to opportunity or levelling up. So just to keep that in, that pressure on, please. And also just a greater understanding, and I know you've mentioned it earlier on in this meeting, about the co-sponsorship role and being able to be really bold with our expectations of what that actually means, because obviously we're trying to work out what our role is, and to try and really still hold government to account and not to build in those mistakes that we're going to be paying for in decades to come, that are politically expedient today, but in decades we will be paying the price for that because there'll be no extra option for capacity building. So that's the couple of points I wanted to make, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'm very pleased you had a positive meeting this morning so far. Let's hope it's one of many left for the day. Rob McIntosh. Sorry, I'm not hearing anything. I'm seeing a hand. No, Rob?
I can see that Rob is coming off mute, but we're not hearing him, Chair.
No, we're not. I'll come back to you, Rob. Mayor Burnham, Andy Burnham.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to Tim for his presentation and paper. I think very much, Chair, continuing in the spirit that Tracy was speaking to. I think it's the note does say this, but I think we just need reassurance that the big vision is still on the table. I think at this point we can't really get trapped into a process of adapting as I understand the adaptive pipeline. Trying to work up from the IRP as published is going to be difficult in that it would, if you like, preclude the big option in that we're trying to improve something that we have fundamental concerns about. On the day of the last main board meeting, the technical assessment had just been issued and we were trying to make sense of it very quickly. But as Tracy was saying, I don't know if all board members have sort of recognised this point. It is reflected in the paper. The government's technical annex says very clearly that the schemes have not been assessed for the levelling up impact. Now that is a major concession as far as I'm concerned. That they've assessed them for transport benefit, and the preferred option scores best on connectivity and capacity, but the levelling up assessment has not been done. And the question I would have, if the levelling up is the core mission of the government, and this is the kind of most flagship policy of levelling up, or supposedly, how could it possibly be left there? And I would just be keen, Chair, that the paper going to the March board really sort of that is a prior question to this work, isn't it? Until we kind of have a proper assessment of the economic benefit to the north of England of all of the options, I don't see how anybody can get trapped into a particular option. Now, I know that might be, I know there may be an alternative argument that says you've got to start working with what's on the table and we just have to be realistic. But I can't see how we can concede that point when this is just critical to the economy of the north for this century and the next. So I kind of feel that the adaptive pipeline approach could almost trap us into trying to improve up the IRP as opposed to sort of making the big picture argument for a a very different approach. And I hope it doesn't, but I was just seeking reassurance on that point. I think this board, going back to the government saying we really do need a levelling up assessment of the MPR preferred option as set out by this board and the current IRP configuration. I think that is, Parliament will demand that once this plan. I'd be surprised if the Select Committee didn't recommend that something similar has to be done. So I don't think it is an unrealistic sort of requirement that before we go any further into any detailed work on options appraisals, there is that big picture piece of work done on the levelling up impact of both schemes. Our preferred option and the one the government has put on the table. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. I think that's a very important point you make there, because obviously the levelling up white paper also has come out after the IRP document, and we're still sort of getting to grips with what that's saying. And you're right to say that this is sort of an interim report for a much fuller discussion at the March 30th meeting. I've got a number of people wanting to come in. Councillor Hale.
Sorry, just find my mute. Following on from Tracy and Andy, I think that I do welcome the submission we put to the Select Committee, in that without being cynical, there was more mentions of Hull in that than there was in the original document, actually. So that's more's the pity, I think, to the original. But I do hope that
shows the influence you've had.
Absolutely, or the influence, hopefully, that TFN has, Chair. But what I would say was that I'm hoping that if the government, if pragmatically the IRP, there's a range of other additional. I mean, my view is obviously it should have all come through the IRP route, and it should be a strategic comprehensive plan. But if the IRP is now going to be seen as effectively work in progress, but potentially to be topped up or assisted by a range of potential other funding pots, such as pipeline streams, maintenance programs, etc., levelling up funds. I'm pragmatic. I mean, all I want is the outcomes that we wanted in our original plan, and I'm not really bothered how we get there. I'd prefer the transparent here it is route, but let's seek to lever in resource from wherever, because the point I've made, and I made it to yourself, Martin, Patrick, and others, was that certainly half the issue for us in Hull and East Yorkshire was actually we came out of maintenance budgets over many years because people said, oh, well, let's not do it as a maintenance scheme, let's do it as part of a proper upgrade. So, we'd have got there if it had been left in the maintenance schemes in the first place. So some of those issues, my view is let's look at how we can lever around the resources. And certainly from the decarbonising agenda, it would make no sense to not look at that in relation to both the Port of Hull and the Port of Immingham, and obviously the Port of Liverpool, I'm sure, if Steve's around. So I would ask that we look at it as pragmatically as to how we can lever the other resource in to get to the original plan we wanted in the first place, hopefully in some guise. Thank you.
That's a very good point. And Rob, we'll try Rob again now.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's fine. We're there now.
Good. Sorry, apologies for that. And hello to everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Rob McIntosh from Network Rail, Managing Director at Eastern, and Peter Henley's asked me to take over his seat on the board. There was three things I just wanted to say. Firstly, I think it's absolutely right to keep the vision alive in terms of what we want to do for Northern Powerhouse Rail and what we want to do across the north. I think that's the right thing that we must do. But speaking as someone who's been spending the last 3 years trying to get on and deliver some immediate investments, one of the positives of the integrated rail plan is it does unlock what's been annualised funding of a number of immediate projects, whether it's electrification from Victoria out to Staley Bridge, whether it's progressing with the work at Leeds, whether it's electrifying from York down to Leeds, or indeed getting on some of the work that we're doing in Tees Valley. And therein, I think, is something we should not we should have the opportunity to emphasise in our work with the IRPs. Is a really positive role for TFN to take, and how do we get on with what is unlocked as a consequence of the publishing of the IRP. There are some big decisions to be made in the coming years about how we build TransPennine Upgrade, to what extent we can cope, the economies, the communities can cope with the closures. And so we need to lean into those. And TFN's got a great role to play in that. And my last point, Chair, is that a few have mentioned about alternative funding mechanisms. I think it's absolutely right to really pursue those as an organisation, and that we're very open to those discussions on how we can facilitate that. And we've got examples of where we're trying to pursue that elsewhere in the country that we can use as part of this work.
Okay, Rob, thanks very much indeed, and I look forward to catching up with you so we can make sure that we're both working hand in hand as to the way forward. Thanks very much. Now, Mark Rawston.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It was just following on from some of the earlier comments. I think we must not lose sight of the economic impact, beneficial economic impacts that this can have, and I think this plays into how we perhaps reposition TFN in a more sort of direct manner and get away from perhaps some of the politics around relationship with government, and that we focus in on the economic benefit messaging to really make sure that TFN speaks for across the North and really coalesce around economic impact, because that's where I think TFN can make a big difference in its conversations with government and not lose sight of that ambition.
Thank you very much, Mark. Jamie Driscoll, Mayor Driscoll.
Thanks, Chair. 3 short points then. First of all, exactly actually what Mark's been saying there. The Levelling Up White Paper, of course, has 12 missions. They are time-bound. They're by 2030, they were supposed to have achieved all these things. It isn't going to happen without significant transport changes. Given that that's come out, as you said, Chair, since the IRP, there absolutely is the case to go back and open this up, which was, so I fully support Andy Burnham's point on that. In the meantime, though, what Darren was saying, and Rob was agreeing with, is, well, let's crack on with what we can now, because we all know the lead-in time on these things is huge anyway. And that's why Martin Gannon, Heather Scott and I have been working together to try and I've spoken with the Secretary of State to try and say those things that were mentioned in the IRP, where there's not a lot of clarity about them, can we bring them forward? Can we have direct involvement from TFN board members to make sure they happen? Otherwise, they will drift. We all know they'll drift. And third point, just to thank you. It was great to see the submission that went to this select committee, and it's always good to see the East Coast Main Line and the Leamside Line specifically bullet pointed there, because we weren't for a long, long time. Thank you.
Good. Well, excellent. Okay, fine. Thanks. So, look, this is, again, that was a preliminary discussion, really, and we'll have the more substantive discussion on the 30th of March. There's been a few things there that we need to follow up on from what people have said, and also possibly take the opportunity, Martin, of submitting some of the points that have been made there, again, possibly in a follow-up letter to the Transport Select Committee, because I do think that's a major opportunity as far as getting some of these things readdressed and asking them to consider including in their report.
Chair, we can certainly look at that. I'd also kind of just re-emphasise the point that, yes, I think as we talked about under the funding discussion, we need to retain that long-term ambition, because it is evidence-based in the independent economic review, which actually was the catalyst for the strategic transport plan. So the fact that we're going to be focused on the independent economic review, updating the strategic transport plan, will do exactly what the board members are looking for, which is grounding in evidence around how do we unlock the economic potential. I think we can be working with Rob and colleagues within and colleagues within DFT to, as Mayor Driscoll says, get on and deliver what's in the pipeline already. But I think this just remind the board that we are coming to the point where we'll be shortly publishing our work on transport-related social exclusion, which is actually very, very pertinent for the debate about levelling up. And it's another bit of evidence that we can help add into the mix. And having the funding to support the analytical team, we've got that analytical team being able to look at the economic benefits of this. So I think this is where we do need, as Mayor Brabin has said, make our contribution as a co-sponsor really telling of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve for residents and communities of the North. And I think we can add some real value there.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Right, we'll move on then now to item number 6, which is the Strategic Transport Plan Policy Development. This paper had been on the agenda at a previous meeting, but time was not sufficient to allow it to be discussed in detail. And I'm going to get Tim to introduce it and take any points. Tim.
Thank you. And I'm going to give a very brief introduction and hand to Lucy, who wrote the paper. What we bring to the board today are 2 policy positions covering active travel and multimodal hubs. As members will know, in the Strategic Transport Plan that was agreed back in 2019, there was a series of quite high-level policy positions, and the STP committed TfN to developing those proposals in greater depth before the next STP. And when we agreed the programme for the new STP with you back in September, we said we'd be bringing a range of policy positions as work in progress through the board to give you that visibility as the evidence base and the positions build up for the new STP. So these are two of what will be a series of policy positions coming through broad in the coming months. Every time we bring something to you, it's been worked up with all of your officers and agreed as a northern position, and it's also been worked through with the delivery partners, National Highways and Network Rail, as well as with the department through the internal assurance and policy development process that we operate. The policy positions are really there to help explain how TfN discharges its statutory role, quite often in areas where we're not directly responsible for delivery, but can help both with strategic planning and with implementation. And active travel is a really good example of that, actually. So it's all about where can we add maximum value as an organisation, how do we make best use of our capability, whether that's working with LTAs, whether it's providing the advice and the evidence, or where TfN speaks with one voice in terms of engaging with government on national policy issues. So as we bring these different policy positions to board, we'll also be showing you as we go along how they then fit into the new STP and all the work that we do. Now, clearly, the extent to which we can do all these things is obviously now going to depend on the business plan and on the priorities. But what we're trying to do is set out as clearly as possible, as I said, where TfN adds maximum value. So you'll see more of this coming through the summer, but these are the first 2. And we'll also start to share with you the emerging work on the development of the STP. But I'm now going to hand over to Lucy, who is leading both the policy development work and the development of the new strategic transport plan. And I think, Lucy, if you take active travel and then potentially we sort of pause for questions at that point.
Great, thanks Tim, and good afternoon board. So I just wanted to kind of briefly give an overview of what's covered in the paper and then the appendix, which is the actual policy position that we've worked up. So in terms of active travel, the paper tries to set out what we said in the original STP in terms of this. So there was a number of policy positions that were contained in our original STP that were clearly agreed with partners at the time. And what we've been trying to do, as Tim kind of set out, is to go back and revisit those and understand how we can strengthen those, how we can kind of really clarify what TfN's role is within these different spaces, and bring that back through board so we can kind of get some agreed positions that we can feed into the next STP. So all of the policy positions we've been working up are kind of taking a similar kind of structure. So we kind of draw out the context for the policy area we're looking at, the challenges within that space, and the challenges for TfN in operating in that space, and then try to set out what we've agreed with our partners as potentially TfN's kind of key role in that area. And then we try to move into kind of how we're proposing to kind of turn these policies into action in that short to medium term. So again, what realistically can we do in the next kind of 5 years within this space to proactively support partners, and clearly that will be kind of framed by our funding. So in terms of active travel, there's a number of challenges for partners in this space in delivering active travel infrastructure within the North. And primarily that's focused around short funding cycles, a lack of kind of standards and poor representation of benefits for active travel within business cases. So through the engagement we've been doing with our partners, we've identified a number of kind of key roles that collectively we think TFN can proactively play to better support this policy area. And those are summarised in the report at paragraph 4.4. As I mentioned, a key kind of objective for the revised STP is for us to think about how we turn our policies into action. And as such, the paper and the policy position itself set out what we think those actions are in that short to medium term time frame within active travel. So what realistically can TFN do in this space in the next 3 to 5 years? How can we do that within our current kind of powers and resources? And that's kind of framed the actions we've identified. So I just wanted to bring board's attention to kind of 4 of those actions that are summarised there, which I think are the kind of the core actions. So the first one of those is around building relationships with Active Travel England, which, as you know, has recently been established. So building those relationships in order to be able to discuss and influence the need for schemes being evidenced properly, so how you improve that business case kind of representation of the benefits active travel can bring, how we open up conversations around more sustained funding for active travel rather than this piecemeal competitive funding process that kind of exists at present, which is problematic. And then also thinking about how some of that funding perhaps is allocated, so thinking about the longevity of that. So those links with Active Travel England as it's becoming more established, I think, are really critical. And going back to kind of our statutory functions, TFN's role in terms of influencing there, I think is really critical to have that kind of conversation with them on behalf of the North, as well as the conversations I'm sure your own organisations will be having on a one-to-one basis. The other kind of key role, I guess, that ourselves and partners have identified for TFN in this space is about applying the existing tools and techniques that we've developed through our analytical capability to show those co-benefits of active travel. So building that into TFN's own work streams, but also working with partners to help develop your own business cases for more sustained active travel investment. And then the final kind of 2 roles, I guess, we've identified collectively are around showcasing best practice, so including good active travel kind of schemes within the TFN Northern Evidence Hub. How do we showcase that and kind of celebrate success and innovation in the sector so that we can kind of learn from each other? And then the final role, again, is going back to that influencing role. How can TFN, support partners further in this agenda? So part of that will be through issuing statutory advice as and when perhaps consultations are launched by government within this space, but equally as well, it's about trying to utilise kind of our political connections through the use of events such as all APPG events and things like that to kind of really kind of raise the profile of active travel and the good work that's happening across the North, but also what else needs to be done to kind of really drive this agenda forward. As Tim said, I'll pause there and take questions on that one if there are any before we move on to multimodal hubs.
Okay, Councillor Hale.
Yes, I welcome that. I welcome the paper and the discussion. I do, and I welcome some of the proposed the actions. I am concerned that this, because of the nature of how most of the money for the early schemes came from the Emergency Active Travel Fund, and dare I say it, some of the response to some of those schemes, particularly. I mean, we've held the line in this area regarding the cycle lanes we put in. I know a lot of authorities have ripped them out and have partly because of the sort of political opportunism that might be at play in some of those areas, I'm sure, from people opposing those schemes. But I worry very much about a pepper potting across the North. I worry about that for the railway. I worry about that for active travel. So I think we need to have some working with the government at a sort of statutory level, and I do welcome their changes to the Highway Code personally. I do, but I think we need to ensure that there's, that there is not 20 just different active travel policies across the north, that there is one and it has some coherence. And so anything we can do to support and encourage that, I would be fully supportive of, because, as I say, I do worry that otherwise we might be pepper potted as a response from those that shout the loudest, I think, in some areas, of which this won't be one, I promise you.
Thanks, Darren. Louise.
Yeah, thank you. I'd support what Darren says there. I think it's really important. I welcome this document, and I think there is more we can do at a local authority level as well to support this around planning and our local plans and supplementary planning documents. We've just approved one around parking standards for new developments, and I know the government's got something around EV charging coming in later in the year, but there's a lot we can do. So I think if that sort of joined up thinking with local authorities and our mayoral areas would be really helpful, and actually looking at what teeth we've got to put some of these things in place.
Okay, thanks. Mayor Burnham.
Thanks, Patrick. So I just want to follow up on what Lucy was saying about Active Travel England, because obviously Chris Boardman has been appointed chair, and Chris was our cycling and walking commissioner and very much developed the Greater Manchester vision. And I think it's fair to say that the Active Travel England vision will, I think, largely be drawn from a lot of what Chris was doing here. So we are in a position, I think, to support people and do exactly what Darren was just saying, which is get that consistency and design standards across the north. And we've got a lot of work at a TFGM level that we can share with everybody on this call, and we would be keen to do that. I do think we should invite Chris fairly soon to a meeting of Transport for the North. I know he's very well disposed to it. I think Dan Jarvis made the point a couple of meetings ago that we did invite him to a previous meeting, so there is a relationship there. The main point I wanted to pick out, Chair, if I may, is the bullet point around pan-northern schemes. Because I don't yet see the joined up thinking when I look at what's going on across the north, particularly when it comes to roads. National highways or Highways England seem to be, that's the bit of transport infrastructure that just moves quickly, and they spend unlimited sums, it seems to me, on the motorway network with questionable impact, certainly on the smart motorway scheme. And yet there's really little opportunity taken to see whether or not some of the road investment can lead to sort of parallel cycle and walking infrastructure. It's not ideal, but sometimes it's kind of useful to follow a main transport node. When we built the Lee guided busway, which was a kind of new off-road busway, there was a cycle track put in alongside it, and it has been really successful actually, because it's flat and it's going directly to where people want to go. So my point will be yes, absolutely yes to the pan-northern schemes. But it feels to me we've hit a point here where National Highways, I think, needs to come to this board more often to say how it is maximising transport impact from some of the investment it's making. I don't believe it is maximising the transport beneficial impact of some of its investments. It's spending huge amounts of money, but often I think with very limited benefit other than for drivers. And I think we need to see them coming to this board. I would add into that list Network Rail, Chair, because I think Network Rail should be building parallel cycling provision alongside railway upgrades. It was kind of useful to hear about getting on with the stuff in the integrated rail plan, but let's see it as more than rail. I would see the Canals and Rivers Trust own large chunks of land across the north that could be used for cycling and walking provision. And again, often are not in this debate. I think yes to those pan-northern schemes, but those players need to up their game pretty massively, I would say, when it comes to thinking about active travel as part of the major investments that they make. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of good points in that, Andy. I think the other point that I would make is where there will be opportunities, I'm pretty sure, where we'll be able to bid in for schemes, and actually having schemes ready is something that is vitally important as far as persuading government in certain respects that we've got the right solutions. Now, I got Councillor. I'm not going to pronounce this right. Sorry. Dagoin?
Yes, Dagoin. Yes.
Right. Thank you. Sorry,
it's all right. Andy Dagoin from City of York. I just wanted to support a lot of what Mayor Burnham has just said. That the point about working with Active Travel England, which, as we know, is going to be based in York, is really important. And also the points about having consistency and an evidence base for active travel schemes has been referred to. You know, that some of them have been controversial. I think from the point of view of the economic benefits for businesses, you know, has been documented to a greater or lesser extent. But I think we need to, where schemes have been implemented, if we've got hard evidence about that economic impact, as well as the mode shift that is achieved by those according to particular standards, I think that is really important to work that we can do. Working with Chris Boardman and Active Travel England to get that consistent approach, and to very much, I'm sure that if everyone on this call will have experienced a situation where local residents think yes, but it doesn't work quite the same way here, and everyone says that, but we need to be able to say that there is best practice where we can have win-win situations from a better provision of quality active travel infrastructure.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Councillor Heather Scott.
Yes, just a brief comment, Patrick. To share what we're proposing with other local authorities areas, and I think it is important that we do all have a standard approach to this, because if it's got to work, we don't want to have different local authorities doing different things. So I think that is an important point.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I think that there will always be different things, but it's also what works well that can be copied elsewhere as well, I think is very important. I last summer was in Mid Wales, and some of the changes they've made there in some of the pavements have made a tremendous difference to the high streets as far as allowing people to feel happier in streets and the like. Martin.
Chair, if I might, I just wanted to build on some of those very helpful conversations. Of course, we have the Chief Executive of National Highways, Nick Harris, as a member of this board, and I don't think he's able to make it today, but he has addressed the board before about what they do. It just strikes me, it feels like there's a really good debate or discussion to be had maybe as the partnership board, where we get Chris to come along with his Active Travel England, we get National Highways, who do have discretionary funds for some of this work, so how can we tap into some of that? And you and I saw some of the work they're doing, a particular scheme on the A66 last week, Chair, but this point about networks and joining things up, and I'm also struck by the point about maybe we can work with Rob to see if we can get somebody from Network Rail, and I think the Canals and River Trust is actually a really good spot. So it just feels to me, Chair, let's work to see if we can get a decent conversation in the partnership board session maybe around that active travel, and maybe work with Ian at DFT to see whether the DFT colleagues would like to be involved in that, because it does feel like it's an area where we can use our power to convene some of these people in the same room and actually make some progress in the short term, and maybe tap into some of the funding mechanisms like the discretionary funds that National Highways have. But I just wanted to maybe say, leave that one with us. We'll bring it back for a conversation to the board, because I think there is a good debate there to be had.
Andy, you wanted to come back. Sorry.
My apologies, Chair. Would you mind if I just jump back in? I really welcome what you just said, Martin. I wonder if we could take it a step further, and again, whether this is an opportunity with a new chair to make a new sort of pitch. I think having a formal protocol with some of these organisations for TFM would be good. And I think, we should have, I think, an expectation now, if they're doing any pan-northern scheme, particularly Highways England, that there should be an opportunity for this board or the main board to look at it and just pass comment on it before it is finalised. Because, sometimes they don't have the local knowledge that people on this board have. But people could say, if you were just to put in a sort of a cycle link there, it could link to something else we're doing in the. Do you see the point? I wonder whether we kind of be very specific actually in asking for sort of early input into pan-northern schemes, particularly those brought forward by highways or national highways as they now are. I think that would be a sensible ask to make, to see if we can build more active travel input into these things. Thanks. Sorry, Chair, to interrupt.
No, not at all. I think that's a very useful point. I think we need to, have a bit of a think about the way in which our meetings are using the organisations which are on TFN so that we have proper discussions with them. However, also not wanting to try and get too many meetings or too longer meetings, but to work it in a way that we know what schemes are coming up. I mean, the scheme where I was looking at last week up in Cumbria with Martin, it's over £1 billion. It's a one hefty scheme, and the whole point of making sure that we at least cycle proof wherever we can schemes longer term is, I think, very, very important. But not just cycle proof as well. Pedestrians also want to have opportunities. Walkers want to have opportunities. Okay, I just wonder if Lucy or Tim, perhaps Lucy first, and then Tim, if you just want to wrap up on the whole section. But Lucy, is there anything you want to add, bearing in mind what's been said by members?
No, I would just thank everybody for kind of the positive response and kind of the comments, and we can definitely integrate a lot of those kind of thoughts within the actions. I think they're nicely aligned, so it's great to kind of hear the support in terms of that policy area and our plans in that space.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. Tim, do you want to say anything?
Nothing else for me, but we do need to pick up the multimodal hubs policy position as well, which should be a bit briefer. So if you're okay with that, Chair, I'll hand back to Lucy for the second half.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry, I missed that. Lucy?
I'll keep it really brief, but again, within the paper, we kind of covered two policy positions. So the other one was around multimodal hubs. So again, we've kind of taken the same approach in terms of developing this and the same kind of structure within the document in terms of the challenges within this space, setting out kind of what TFN's role are and the proposed actions. So for the purpose of time, I'll just kind of quickly whittle through the proposed actions, I guess, in that short to medium term, and would be keen to kind of hear if there's any additional thoughts from board. So as I mentioned, that key objective of thinking about, pragmatically, what can we do in that short to medium term within our current powers. In terms of multimodal hubs, what we've kind of explored is there's 4 kind of core actions, I guess, we've identified. So one of those is around working with local partners to identify locations for future development of multimodal hubs or improvements to existing multimodal hubs, and working with partners to make that case to government for investment. So that might be utilising some of our modelling capability or providing kind of advice based on what we know works well there. The other kind of action that came as a direct result from the discussion with scrutiny on this topic was the multimodal hubs position, as it's currently kind of been drafted, is very much passenger focused. So what we've done is we've added a recommendation into the freight and logistics strategy, which will be coming back through board next month, to prioritise a work stream to consider kind of freight multimodal hubs and what it means in terms of freight interchanges, and think about that within the business planning process for next year. Similarly, we've kind of identified that there's some really useful work that's been done within our strategic rail team. So a piece of work where they've been looking at the rail station study to inform future investment and decision making. So again, sharing the findings of that study, I think, with partners should help develop stronger business cases for multimodal hubs where required. And then again, the other kind of key role for TFN across all of the policy positions is collating that existing kind of best practice and showcasing what good looks like, so we can kind of try to learn from each other and being a hub for that kind of depository, really. So that's kind of the multimodal hubs policy in a very quick whistle stop tour, but happy to take any thoughts or comments on that particular.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. I haven't got anybody yet wanting to come in on this, so I think we'll note that bit of the report and the work that's carrying on. Oh, sorry, I've got a couple. Yeah, I've got Mark Rawston and then Mayor Burnham.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, obviously welcome this piece of work. I think we have in the past perhaps not given freight as much due attention in all of TFN's work as perhaps it deserves. And I think this is an opportunity to perhaps remedy that by really focusing in on the benefits of freight in a multimodal way. So just really to reinforce that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Mayor Burnham, Andy?
Just for quickly, sorry, Chair, I realise I've come in a lot today. Just on the point about making the case for investment, can I just say that, this does go to our ambitions around Piccadilly. If you're talking national or international gateways, obviously we have quite a few of those in city centre Manchester, but our stations have had minimal investment. Oxford Road, Deansgate, Salford Central, Victoria and Piccadilly itself, barely touched any of them since the 90s. And we would welcome TFN's shoulder behind us in, whatever the decisions on the track, the station infrastructure is really not good enough. And Piccadilly should be a multimodal hub. It should be a flagship version of this policy. And we'd really appreciate the help there. My point was, the main point though, was to say the paper doesn't really focus on the scope for regional multimodal hubs. It talks of national and international, but I think you should be thinking more, regional. In towns, where we can kind of have those sort of interchanges linked to housing development and the placemaking potential, which the paper does touch on, but they will often be in a regional setting, not so much in a national or international setting. And I think a key enabler of this is the concept of station devolution, which was on the agenda a few years ago, and we intend to put back on the agenda as part of the negotiation we've been invited to start with the government following the Levelling Up white paper. I think a multimodal hub, I think, has to be controlled at the place level. Otherwise, it won't make sense. And I do think, rather than wholesale station devolution, we should be thinking about identifying critical regional multimodal interchanges where the place can take control, and we can then sort of model them as a sort of multimodal facility. I think without that, when it's kind of under different control, I think it becomes hard to kind of see how a multimodal version works. We have built multimodal hubs in Greater Manchester, but they're very much for bus and tram, if you like, at the moment. And I think what we need to be thinking is taking ownership of bus, tram, train interchanges where appropriate. And I think that's an enabler of this policy. Sorry, Chair, I will not come in again now.
I won't write that down, Andy, just in case you decide you want to come in again. But thank you for that. I think one of the things I want to try and talk and would welcome sort of colleagues' views on this is just how we try and address some of the major transport areas we've talked about this morning, but go into that deep-rooted conversation with the relevant national bodies, Network Rail, highways, national highways, and the like, so that we can do perhaps a more detailed sort of comment rather than trying to put them very quickly into trying to do 2 or 3 things in one meeting. I think we need longer to go into much more detail. So I'll give some thought to that. And if anyone's got any suggestions, by all means, let me know what they are. Martin, you wanted to come in, and then I want to move on to the government's report.
I think, Chair, is just to say, I think we can look at how we use the partnership board meetings to maybe have some of those longer, in-depth conversations as we move forward. And it's been very timely over the course of this year as we're working on the strategic transport plan. So I think that's the opportunity to move it forward.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Okay, right. Tim, Lucy, thank you very much. I don't think there's anything we need to add on to that, unless there's anything. Okay, fine. Thanks very much indeed. Can we then move on to item 7, which is Julie's governance report, please. Julie, do you want to say anything about it, or is it, what do you want to? How do you want to take this forward?
Very, very briefly, Chairman. Hopefully, it's a very straightforward report. It briefly has two main purposes. First, we're presenting a revised and extended calendar of meetings to the board for itself and Partnership Board and the other TFN committees. And secondly, we're inviting support from the board for an amendment to the membership arrangement for the new General Purposes Committee to reflect the revised membership, which is currently the case on the Rail North Committee, which, if supported, will be presented to the in-person March board and for formalisation. You'll remember, many members on the call will recall that board reviewed its own meeting arrangements last November. Going forward, we expect to have 4 meetings a year, 2 in person and 2 as a consultation call with the Chief Executive. And that slight reduction means the expected meetings for dates for going forward needs to be updated. And we've also extended that list as well to plan for that. So, as has been the case previously, if any unexpected changes are needed in the future, they can be made in consultation with the committee chairs. But other than that, this is the schedule that we would expect to work within. On the point of General Purposes Committee membership, members will recall that it was initially put in place to reflect the Rail North Committee membership, with the 20 constituent authorities grouped into 10 regional groups, each with 1 member, based on the relative populations in the regions. And in November, at the request of the 4 Humber leaders, board approved for the Humber region to have 2 members rather than 1 on Rail North Committee for the north and south of that region, respectively. So the recommendation in today's report is therefore to allow a similar arrangement for General Purposes Committee, and if board agrees to that, to consider the filling of the 2 final vacancies on General Purposes Committee, again subject to final ratification at the in-person meeting in March. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, right. Does anybody have any comments on that, or are people generally content with the recommendations, and can we take those forward? Seems to me that everybody, Julie, I think you've got Louise. Oh, sorry, Louise is saying fine, not that she wants to come in. Thank you. Okay. Right. I think that is then duly taken as agreement with with the recommendations as set out in your paper. Okay. Well, colleagues, thank you all very much indeed. I've been out and met a number of you. I'm looking forward to getting to meet other members over the next month, and I'm much looking forward to the in-person meeting that we've got in Leeds on the 30th of March. But please do feel free to, you can get my number from Marie, and if you want to give me a ring or have a chat about anything particular, please feel free to give me a call. So with that, thank you all very much indeed.